And welcome to a new edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast here on STLSportsPage.com. Rob Reigns, Mike Reigns at our STL Sports Page studio. And Mike, it's September 11th as we tape this edition of the podcast. Obviously, a day that everybody in America takes time to remember where they were and reflect on what happened 24 years ago.
It's weird because it was probably the first thing that I distinctly remember where I was that happened, in my lifetime. And yeah, it's a day that we want to remember all of those people who did lose their lives in that tragic event.
Coincidentally, the Cardinals on that day, 2001, were in Milwaukee, where the Cardinals on this day in 2025 in Milwaukee. That was an interesting day I remember very well. Mike Matheny was out fishing in Lake Michigan with Bob Uecker, and they got a call on the phone that they need to get back to shore and that something had happened. They weren't exactly sure what yet. And then the Cardinals, of course, had to take a bus home from Milwaukee for that trip home because all the flights were grounded. So it's something that was obviously, again, kind of brought back to mind after the tragic shooting in Utah on Wednesday, too.
And at the end of the day, it's just a game, right? We enjoy what we're doing and we enjoy having something to talk about, but we have to remember at some point that there is situations that are bigger than the game itself.
Sure. Cardinals have the day off on Thursday, probably a very well-received, much-needed day off after the 13-inning, 3-hour, 44-minute game marathon in Seattle on Wednesday night. You and I might have been the only two people up in St. Louis watching the end of that game.
I did feel very bad when I was watching the end of the game and I click over, Alexa, Dat, and Al come on. They have to, give a post-game show after that game in St. Louis. It was definitely late for sure, and probably a very early morning arrival in Milwaukee.
I actually have that information available that I was going to bring up here. According to our friends at FlightAware, Cardinals Delta charter from Seattle landed in Milwaukee at 5:57 a.m. So good thing they're not playing.
Good thing they have an off day today.
Good thing they're not playing today.
That's
rest
rough
up
for sure.
But then, of course, the first of three in Milwaukee against the division-leading Brewers on Friday night. 6 of the next 9 games against the Brewers. The other 6 games Cardinals have left, 15 games to play. And I know we're going to talk about the wild card standings here in a second, but every one of those 15 games against somebody that's actually still playing for something. So it's going to be a tough stretch.
And I think what's interesting is you look at Milwaukee and you look at Chicago and you think, well, we're not really chasing them, but the Cardinals could certainly play some spoilers here if they were to get things done, in terms of who wins the division.
Yeah, and or the seeding in the playoffs too. So unfortunately, the Cardinals didn't get the job done in the 13th inning on Wednesday night. They fall to the Seattle on the home run by Julio Rivas off Ryan Fernandez after really kind of having a Houdini act by Riley O'Brien in the 10th, 11th, and 12th innings. The Cardinals escaped losing that game earlier.
You really can't say enough about the bullpen. The job that Swanson did on a couple of those were just very, nasty sliders that he put it away. And then Riley O'Brien just looked fantastic the first inning. Then next inning, he loads the bases and gets out of that jam. And then Fernandez looked pretty good. But what was Ivan Herrera doing at second base?
Well, he admitted that he messed up.
Once or twice?
Twice.
Yes.
Yeah, very bad base running, and unfortunately cost the Cardinals a chance to win that ballgame.
And I think the frustrating thing is, you look back at some of these one-run losses, and I know that's 2 because of the home run, but I'm saying that's a game that you could have won, but you go 2 for 22 with runners in scoring position, and you had the base loaded earlier and couldn't score. You get guys out there, and you got to find ways to capitalize. And if Herrera was doing what he should have been, he stands on second, the ball goes to right field, he tags, gets to third, the fly ball, you take the lead, you never know what happens, right?
Sure.
But the positive throughout the entire thing is the Mets are playing pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helps you.
Yeah. Yeah, the wild card standings, of course, the Cardinals are still, I guess, very much alive mathematically because they're 4.5 back. But the problem is, of course, they're chasing 4 different teams down for one spot. Unless something were to happen with the Cubs or the Padres and they would fall back to the pack a little bit, you're really kind of chasing the Mets. But you also got the Reds, you also got the Giants, and even Arizona. So it's the odds are not impossible, but they're not very good.
And the challenge is, when we filmed this show last week, we were 4.5 back. Well, we haven't moved any closer. Yeah. We haven't lost ground, but we haven't gained ground.
And that's the problem when you're chasing those teams. Somebody almost always is going to win that's ahead of you.
And the thing is, when the Mets are 3-7 in their last 10, you have to find a way to capitalize on that, and we didn't. Now you go to play arguably a better team in the Brewers than the Mariners, and so you got your work cut out for you for sure.
And I guess the one positive about one more takeaway from the game on Wednesday night is Michael McGreevy bounced back 6 very good innings, allowing only 1 run against a very tough offensive lineup. And they got through 3 games without allowing a home run from Cal Raleigh.
That was impressive. He really didn't play that well, I would say, over the stretch, right? McGreevy looked a lot better, and that's what you want to see out of him. And I think the positive is the way him and Libby have pitched these last couple games. You can see the spark and you can see the potential there. So that's the good for the future. But I bet if you asked guys in this clubhouse right now, they're still very much wanting to play for this season right now.
Oh, yeah. And I think you always should have that feeling. And I think getting, Burleson and Contreras back in the Seattle series helped. And now you're going to get Donovan back. All indications are that he will join the lineup on Friday in Milwaukee, playing some rehab games in Springfield this week. And then hopefully Monday you'll get Nolan Arenado back and see what happens from there.
And say what you will about Nolan Arenado and whether he's caused some problems or whether he's had a great year or not. Would anyone have rather seen Arenado come off the bench than Joel Pozo in that situation? So I think getting those guys back is going to make a big difference. But the question mark for me is the guy who's played really well through this entire stretch is Thomas Ajayci.
I was just going to get to him and say the one positive out of not having Donovan and Arenado for the last month is you've gotten a regular dose of Thomas Ajayci. And I always say, especially with young players, it's when your guy has played, in high school, and I know he didn't play in college, but at high school and then the minor leagues as an everyday player, and he's used to playing every day. It's a very tough adjustment to come up to the big leagues and not play every day and play once a week or try to pinch hit. We've heard other young guys come up and talk about how hard it is to make that adjustment. Well, now that he's had that chance to play regularly, you have a little bit better understanding of the fact of why the Cardinals think he has a chance to be a pretty good player. He's still, 23 years old too?
And it's watching him play, are the power numbers going to be there? No, not necessarily. But when you get on base 4 times and you steal a base, like that we talk a lot about home runs, and that was the Jeff Albert philosophy, and that was the mindset before. But to me, just getting guys on base is half the battle too. And so now, granted, you got to find somebody that can hit to bring them over, and that's where you need guys like Arenado and Burleson and the power hitters to come through. But having Sajasi, especially for what he gives you defensively too, has been a nice thing to see.
And that was the other thing take away from Wednesday night's game. Both sides, there were some great defensive plays in that game. I mean, I know a lot of people probably didn't watch because it was a late game to begin with and then play the 13 innings. But especially if you didn't have a dog in the fight and were just watching that game for purely as a baseball fan, it was a great game.
The left side of that Mariners infield between Suarez and J.P. Crawford, they made a couple big plays with some very nice stretches by Naylor over at first. And then Contreras did the same thing, to get the play. I do wish the umpires would have got together to talk about J.P. Crawford, because I do think he was out of it. For anyone that doesn't know, for first base only, he has to be on the right side of the foul line there. And he was on the left side in the grass. And so that's where it becomes a problem. Would that have changed the game? I don't know, but would have been interesting for them to certainly talk about it.
So have you seen enough of Thomas Ajayci in the last month to think that you Cardinals can count on him to be a regular player in 2026? And where would you want him to play?
That's the question mark for me, is where does he play? And honestly, I know a lot of people really like Gorman and they're very high on Gorman, but I would rather see Sajasi at second base than Gorman, because Sajasi can get on base without the strikeouts. And I understand you want the home run and you want the power there, but to me, I think Gorman right now offers more trade bait because somebody wants the power hitter and they see that number there. And I think that's where you may be able to get more in return for him than you would for a Thomas Ajayci.
And I guess it depends on where you think the best fit for Sajasi is, where you think the best fit for J.J. Weatherhold is, because all indications are he's going to be a regular player here in 2026. And I think you have to put Brendan Donovan in that mix too. I mean, there's going to be some and of course Arenado. So you still have more guys for different positions than you have positions available. So that's going to be the challenge for Chaim Bloom, is to sort through all that.
And the question, obviously, we don't know, is what does Chaim think and what does Chaim like, right? Because the other guys you got to figure out at some point here is your outfield Walker, Nootbaar, Victor? Where's Burleson slot into that? Where does Herrera slot into that? So there are a lot of questions to figure out where these guys go. And I'll be curious to see kind of how we play this, next stretch here when we get those guys back and healthy, because we're still trying to contend and you want the best bats in the lineup. So I'd be curious to see who the odd man out is.
And I also think you want to get Donovan and Arenado in the lineup because you want them to end this season on a more positive note than, missing, 4 of the last 6 weeks of the season. And especially if you want to think that you have a chance to trade Arenado this winter, he needs to have a couple of good weeks here at the end of the season.
And I think anyone could safely say that when you watch this team, the offense has been lacking. It's not there, right? So I think having Donovan back will spark that, and so will Arenado. But at this point, is there somebody that should be held out, like is it untouchable from a trade aspect? Or should we just kind of explore the options to get the best team that we can in 2026?
I don't think there's anybody who should be an untouchable. I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to trade everybody, but I think you have to listen. And there's certainly probably some players that, would it be a comfortable trade? No. I mean, you probably have to trade. And I think that's what Chaim Bloom's going to face is I think he's going to have to trade somebody this offseason, especially if we know the Cardinals are going to have some restrictions as far as how much money they can spend on free agents. They're going to have to trade somebody they don't necessarily want to trade. And they're going to have to trade somebody that somebody else wants that's going to be able to bring you something in value back that you don't have in your system or don't have ready to join the team in 2026. That's the challenge.
I think the one thing that we're starting to see for 2026 is that there's a serious hole in starting pitching. Mm-hmm. And that's where the question mark is going to come down to is who are these trades that we get another pitcher? Are these trades that we find somebody that can catch? Because, right now we've kind of piecemealed it together and it's kind of worked together. But, so what is the best option there in terms of starting pitching? Is it a trade? Is it a bring somebody else up and see what they got or what?
Visiting with Mike Rainser on the STL Sports Page Reigns on the Cardinals podcast for this week. And, of course, our podcast, like all of our copy and articles here on stlsportspage.com, brought to you by our friends at the Drury's Hotels, as well as all of our other great sponsors. So if you got any fall travel plans coming up, be sure you check out all the Drury Hotels listing on the website there. You can click on their ad on our site and get straight to their hotel and find out if they've got a Drury Hotel anywhere that you're planning to go. I did see that the newest Drury Hotel it's still a couple years away, but it's going to be built in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Well, we should go check that one out.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's go.
I'm in.
So, again, obviously, thanks to our friends at the Drury Hotel. A couple things you mentioned the catching position. I want to see over the next 15 days. I want to see more of Jimmy Crooks. I'm not saying he needs to start every day, but I think you need to get a little bit more experience, a little bit more of a look at what he might be able to offer you for 2026.
And I have been impressed with Pages these last few days, the way that he's kind of controlled things. He definitely did it in last night's game where he called everybody together of like, do you know where this is going to go, where these balls are going to go? And there was a, bunt right in front of him, and he was very forceful of like, this is mine. Like, that's what you want to see out of a catcher. And that's what we're used to because that's what Yachty did. And so I think what we want to see out of Crooks is, can he do the same thing? Because to me, the catcher is kind of like your captain on the team because
Sure.
He should be the one kind of calling the plays and helping set the defense and doing a few things. So I think we were very fortunate with what Yachty did for so long that we've, not, it's a struggle now to see anything other than that behind the plate.
Exactly. And I think they're finally, they realize that. Yeah, they're going to have to figure out what to do about that. But I think Crooks is a guy that has a chance to do that. They like what they've seen so far. I just want to see some more, see him some more. And that's no disrespect to Pages or even Yoel Pozo, but we've seen their body of work over a longer period of time now, and it's not really going to change over the last 2 weeks of the season.
Would Pages be a serviceable backup? And I think he'd be fine. Yes. Because I like his bat a little bit better than Pozo's probably. But the one thing that Pozo's figured out how to do is pinch hit when you need him and not play every day and still come in with a hit. And that's a skill to have.
The other guy I'm going to be curious to see what they do with the last 2 weeks of the season here is Jordan Walker. Especially now you got Burleson back. If you get, Donovan back and, that throws another potential outfielder into the mix there. But I think Walker needs to play. I'm not saying, again, he has to play the last 15 games of the season, but 10 of the 15, 12 of the 15. I just, the only way he's going to get better is just to play.
And it's the same to me for Nolan Gorman, right?
Yeah.
The two of them just both need to play and get as many at-bats as they can. And somebody's going to be the odd man out. So it's very curious to see, but, where does Walker fit into this team next year? Is he a key piece? Is he a, 20 home run guy that we've seen? Or is he getting traded somewhere else?
I did have a conversation that's for an upcoming story that'll be on the STL Sports page here in the next couple of weeks, working on a background story about Chaim Bloom. And one person I talked to yesterday who's got a long history with Chaim said the one thing you'll find out about him is he's very patient, that he's not going to rush to judgments. And obviously he's had 2 years here in this job to kind of look at people and decide. But I think in my own opinion, without, just kind of reading between the lines here, is I think that bodes well for Jordan Walker, and it bodes well for Nolan Gorman, because I think he's going to give those guys the benefit of the doubt. They're both young players. I would be very surprised this winter if he trades either one of those guys.
And we're talking about guys that are 23 and 24 years old. So, like, they've got a lot of time left still to get there, right? I think we as fans are just looking for a more competitive team on the field. And so that's where we don't want to wait for some of these adjustments to happen. And that's the biggest challenge. But I think we're all big supporters of Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman because we've seen what they can do, and we just want to see it more consistent.
Another guy that's going to be curious to see, although he's not going to be pitching in St. Louis the rest of the season, is Liam Doyle, the left-handed pitcher, the Cardinals' #1 pick in the draft this year, made his first professional start last week for Palm Beach. They've already bumped him up to Springfield, and I think he's probably going to get in a couple of games down there, maybe once in the regular season and at least once maybe in the playoffs. So I'm not saying he's going to come to spring training next year and be a candidate to make the starting rotation right out of the bat, but I think he's a guy that they're going to fast track at some point. You're going to, assuming that he pitches as well in the Cardinal organization as they expect him to pitch. And so I'm curious to see if he gets in those couple of games down in Springfield, what he does.
The other interesting thing about Liam is, like we've talked about before, he's probably already pitching at a AA level in the SEC. So it'll be curious to see how quick they do move him through, because there's also a few injuries and a few guys that just haven't gotten ready, right? We really want to see Tekoa Roby up here, but unfortunately that's not happening. And the same thing with Tink Hence. And so does Liam Doyle get fast tracked because those guys are struggling a little bit to stay healthy?
Yeah. And of course, there's a recovery from Tommy John surgery. That's obviously just going to be a long-term, delay in their progression toward the big leagues. The other, of course, minor league news of the day this week is the rosters were announced for the Arizona Fall League. And I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed with the Cardinal players that are going out there. I mean, I know there's different considerations, and you've got to balance it with I think there's 8 clubs or 6 or 8 clubs that put a roster together that you share. Cardinals are going to be on the Glendale Desert Dogs with a bunch of other organizations. So the other organizations also have players that they want to see out there, and you have to balance, who gets priority at what positions. But the young right-handed pitcher from Taiwan, Chen Wei Lin, is really the only top 20 Cardinal prospect who's going to be making that trip to Arizona for the fall. Again, it's well deserved for him. Missed a lot of this season with a couple different injuries, so he's also currently pitching at Springfield. So a good opportunity for him to go out there and pitch. But I was really hoping you'd see some of the other, younger Cardinal prospects, maybe even Bernal, maybe some of those guys, maybe even Raynel Rodriguez, some of those guys get a chance to go out there and see what they could do, but didn't happen.
The priority for this team right now is pitching, right? Because I think that's where we struggle. And then as we've seen, with guys throughout this entire season, the health of a starting pitching is tough, and you just need innings at some point, right? That's why both the Brewers and the Braves took a shot at Eric Fetty because they needed innings. And so,
think he's going to pitch this weekend?
Yeah. It's just kind of weird, right? But, the depth of starting pitching is something that the team can always use and always use more of, and the same with the bullpen.
And I'm going to throw out another guy, in not a pitcher, but there's a guy that is playing in Memphis, an outfielder that I don't think is getting enough respect for what he's done, not only this year, but in the last year in AA Springfield, as we look at potential outfielders and go forward, and that's Brian Torres. He's a 28-year-old outfielder. Obviously, he's a left-handed hitter, which hurts his chances on this club because you've got a lot of those guys. Koperniak's another one that's down there. He won the Texas League batting title last year. Okay, a little bit older player, but now he's in AAA, been there all year. He's third in the International League batting race. He leads the International League in on-base percentage. Also has 26 stolen bases, can play second base, could even probably be an emergency catcher if he had to, because that was his background. I think, I'm going to be curious. I mean, he's a guy that would have to be protected on the 40-man roster this winter, or risk him to the Rule 5 draft. He's a guy at that age that you would think would be ready to step into a big league ball club. So I think he's a guy that we need to take a little bit more of a look at.
And I think there's quite a few guys that we need to probably look at to figure out. I wouldn't say that anybody on this current roster is safe, so to speak, right? Because the other guy, you just mentioned him, is Matt Koperniak. He had a really good spring training. He's played pretty solid. He wasn't a guy that projected to be long-term plans here, but he's been a very good player, and he's done a nice job when called upon.
And don't forget Nathan Church in that category. I mean, he's made some really nice plays in the outfield. And people always said that he was the best defensive outfielder in the organization, as he was coming up the last couple of years. And I think he's shown that. The question is, can he hit enough to stick and be a regular player in the big league level?
And it is very interesting to watch these battles because there are a lot of guys in Memphis that I think are going to be here quicker than we think. And another one of those guys that I think is probably not too far away and they're very high on because they just got him, and I know Heim's high on him, is Blaze Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he probably becomes first base once Wilson's done, but what happens to Burleson? So there are a lot of guys to watch the battle over the next, 3 weeks to end the season and throughout all of spring.
It's interesting as I was watching the 3 games in Seattle, and you see all those players that the Mariners have and how exciting team they have. And I know they're a different kind of club than the Cardinals because they hit a lot of home runs, but that's the kind of club the Cardinals need to have, an exciting young team on the field that's going to get the fans excited and re-energized a little bit back at the ballpark. And they've got some guys who have the potential to do that. We just have to see if they're going to get the opportunity and can follow through on that opportunity. The
one thing I really like that the Mariners do that I wish we would do more of is run. They're very aggressive on the base pass. And look what that happens. It creates more energy and it creates more of an atmosphere. And we don't run. We've got a lot of guys that can get there. And as you and I have harped, the one thing I want to see the rest of the season is Victor batting leadoff. What's it going to hurt? And with his speed and his ability to get on base, it's basically like getting him a double because he's going to be on second. And then he can score basically on an infield single if he needed to.
They just went through a 16-game stretch without a stolen base. The longest streak since 19 games struck in 2013. And that's supposed to be a team that ran more.
And we've got guys that are fast. We've got guys that can run. Why are we not trying it?
Yeah.
What are we afraid of?
Getting thrown out.
And is that on Ollie? Is that on Pop? Who's making that call?
Yeah, Scott with 32 stolen bases, I think, but that's really the only guy that's maybe even the only guy in double figures. I'm not sure without looking at the list.
And again, that's another big question mark as we head into this offseason is the coaching staff.
Yeah, they need to get more speed. And they got the speed, they just need to use it.
They need to use it. And so are there going to be some changes? People have had some questions about Pop Warner at third and his ability to send guys or bring guys here, and was he part of the problem with Herrera in last night's game? I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. And what do they do with Ollie?
Yeah, there's a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made between now and the end of the season. And I don't think some of those decisions are not going to be made based on what happens in the rest 2 weeks of the season, because we've obviously got 148 games or so of track record already to go on. But we won't know the answers to some of those until that's over. So,
and I think the other one interesting thing worth noting is as we look at 2026 and what money do they decide to spend or not spend or trades they decide to make is, as much as none of us want this, the new CBA expires at the end of this season, and there's going to be some meetings and discussions, and there's a lot of talk about salary cap. And I do think that's going to cause some problems because people are going to be afraid to commit to long-term deals, right, knowing that there's the potential of a lockout after next season.
Yeah, the contract expires in December of 2026, so everybody's talking about potentially a lockout in spring training in 2027. So hopefully we won't get that. But I do think it's going to be a factor in terms of deciding long-term contracts and things like that, and maybe even potentially for managers as well.
And I'm not saying it's the answer, but it may be one of those where Heim doesn't make a lot of moves to change for 2026 just because he's not sure what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And 2027 is more of those changes, but it'll be very interesting to watch.
We're going to find out. It all starts again, the last 15 games to go, 3 in Milwaukee starting on Friday night. Of course, we'll have it all covered for you on stlsportspage.com. Mike, thanks for the visit. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. Stay tuned to and keep checking out all of our other content here on stlsportspage.com. And don't forget 9/11, remember and observe as well. So have a great day, everybody.